Everybody to this evening's Green Party Women Get Together. We're really honoured and pleased to have Anne Gayfer and Elizabeth Mansfield with us tonight. The purpose being that quite often as members of this party, we don't really get as involved in all the aspects that we perhaps like to, sometimes just through lack of awareness of how the procedures work. So this is all about policy making and how does that happen? And could you do that? Are there policies you'd like to see happen? Because I know there are for me, but I've always been really hesitant because the process, and some of us are just not that way inclined. But Anne Gayfer is the Policy Development Co-ordinator of the Green Party, and she's going to explain somehow in a nutshell to people like me how this all works and how we as women in the women's group can get involved. And then Elizabeth Mansfield, who I've had the honor of working alongside on the incredibly honorable Truth About Zane campaign. And she brought that into existence, and she has hammered that campaign to make sure it stays relevant and seen by the party. So Elizabeth's going to actually talk us through what it was like to create a campaign within the party and to get that into policy. So yeah, and what we'll do is we're going to have, first of all, Anne's going to talk us through, then we'll do a few questions. And then after that, it'll be Elizabeth, and then we'll go through any questions after that, and then just general. So if everybody's happy, if we can keep cameras and microphones off, that would be great. And yeah, and then we're going to hand it over straight away, I think, to Anne Gayfer, if you're ready for that, Anne.
Yep, sure, yeah.
Wonderful. And again, thank you so much. But of course, our speakers can have their cameras on. Thanks so much. I'll leave it with you.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name's Anne Gayfer. I'm the Policy Development Coordinator, and I am in South Lincolnshire Green Party. I am now I've been challenged to explain policy in a nutshell, which I think is going to be quite challenging. So one of the reasons I haven't actually done any slides tonight is because the slides that we do have about the policy process are quite complicated. So my main purpose really for coming along tonight is to try and broaden the policy community. We've got quite a few people, actually, quite a few experts I notice in the audience. So this isn't a group of people who don't know anything about policy by a long chalk. I think Tina said that I would take questions at the end. I'm also very happy if I say something or use some abbreviations to be interrupted in the middle of my talk to clarify what I'm saying. So I'm going to start by copying and pasting. If I can just see the chat, I'm going to copy and paste the... oh, can I only paste to you, Sue? Or can I paste to everybody?
Ah, right. Yes, it's probably just to me, but then I can do it to everybody.
Okay.
So you can just message hosts and co-hosts.
Yeah, so I have just posted to Sue, who will post generally the Policy Development Committee email. And I want to start also by saying that we're really keen to hear from everybody. We're very, very friendly. And if you've got a question about policy and you think you might be interested, then please don't hesitate to get in touch, and somebody will speak to you, phone you up, and encourage you to get involved in what you're interested in. And one of the really quite exciting things for me when I first became Policy Development Coordinator was that we asked if anybody was interested in being co-opted, and we had 133 responses, which was completely overwhelming. And we've managed to contact nearly all of those people, and a lot of them have now gone into policy working groups, and they're really enjoying it. It's quite an interesting experience. Yeah, so tonight is about broadening people's understanding and getting people engaged if they would like to do so. So I have quite a big committee. I've got 5 elected members who are elected in the annual ballot that SOC, the ERO, runs. And 5 co-opted people. And sitting beneath that, we've got about 35 policy working groups, most of which are functioning, but we've got a few who aren't functioning. So members of the committee are sort of allocated. We call them, it's not an official title, we call them the link person for the policy working group. So each member of the committee works with about 4 policy working groups. And the idea is to work out where they are, whether they're just starting off, whether they're quite advanced and they just don't know how to go about making some policy, or whether they're just about to put their policy to conference. And there are rules about how to do this, mainly laid down in the standing orders on the conduct of conference, which nobody ever reads until they get onto Policy Development Committee. But in there, you will find out almost everything you need to know about taking policy to conference. So I think that this way of doing things has really been very successful, because we've managed to get a lot of the new policy working groups that were up and running that were previously defunct. And I think the feedback that we get is that by a member of Policy Development Committee being in the meeting, even though we're not participating, it gives people confidence about what they're doing. So that's really what sits behind it. And obviously the ultimate objective is to get our policy for sustainable societies with up-to-date policies in it, and to make policy statements for contemporaneous events. I think the easiest way to describe the way policy is made is that it has to be an accountable process. So rather than explaining how every different type of policy works, I'll say that it starts off by originating from the policy community. It then sometimes goes to GPRC, but it always goes to conference. So even if it goes via GPRC, ultimately it always goes to conference. So even where sometimes interim decisions are made by GPRC, absolutely everything will go to conference. And places to look out for it are not only in the main motions that are in the main agenda, but there's often policy in the back of the GPRC report, and there are also some changes in the Policy Development Committee report. So people who go to conference, it's a great thick document to read, but it is quite important to look at all of the documents, because they are actually all there for a reason. And I'd be the first one to hold my hand up and say that I arrive at conference not actually having read the agenda, but there we go. We go to conference, PDC go to conference every time it happens, and we sit on the SOC desk at the front and we answer questions if there are any about policy, any questions from the floor during plenary. And we also are generally sort of milling around, attending workshops and that kind of thing. And I mean, Elizabeth, for example, will know that we sit in, she's seen us sitting in policy meetings and checking what the policy working groups are up to and what sort of policy is developing. So I think I'm going to stop there. I don't know whether to people who say they don't know much about policy, whether that made any sense or not, but I'm happy to take questions and try and expand on any of that if that's the best way of doing it.
That was just fabulous, Anne. Thank you so much. Can I ask a quick question? You know, when you were talking about like being on the SOC desk, is the Standing Orders Committee desk, and then Green Party Regional Council playing a role. For Policy Development Committee, do those bodies, the changes in them when we have an electoral changeover and things, where maybe things aren't as carried forward, does that hinder your process, or are you in sync with that?
We're not actually in sync with it, because the SOC standing. Sorry, I see somebody's putting.
Sue is just marvelous for making sure we all get it.
The Standing Orders Committee are elected every year. Policy Development Committee used to be elected every year, but because there's so much to learn, we actually had that changed recently. So Policy Development Committee members are in post for 2 years. We're not all in sync with each other, and to be honest, that's quite a good thing as well, because in the old days where everybody on Policy Development Committee left at the same time, you know, it takes you 6 months to find out what you're doing. And then the Regional Council, we're also not in sync with them, because they elect their members. There's 2 per region and 2 from Wales that sit on the Regional Council, and all of those regions have a different electoral cycle, but those people are also elected, I think from memory, for 2 years each.
I think because it's kind of putting me in mind of when we change government, and yet the civil servants then have to keep up with, you know, the new dictates coming down the line, and how much of a burden that must be with policy development. Just to remind everybody in the room, you're more than welcome to raise your hand, and then we'll put your microphone and your camera on to ask a question if you want, or put your questions in the chat if you have any for Anne. And like I've had some friends join recently, so if they wanted to get involved, where would be their starting point? Is there policy development? You've just said that we could actually find that somewhere. Is that just a matter of emailing and asking for the document on how to make it, or?
Well, Sue has put our email address in the chat. Another really good place to start is to attend Policy Fest, and our next Policy Fest is from the 10th to the 13th of June. I mean, it does feel like we've only just had one, but the reason we've got...
I'm sure you just did.
We have just had one, and I do believe the last time I looked, all the recordings were still available on the member website. And I mean, I'm a bit of a geek, I suppose, but I've actually watched all of them, I think, because they are quite interesting. But the reason we're running the Policy Fest so soon after the last one is because there wasn't a spring conference. The cancelling the spring conference has caused us a huge amount of problems, because there are certain constitutional things that have to happen at spring conference that haven't been able to happen.
And the time restraint on the policies that have been put to the conference as well, is that playing a part?
Yeah, so we've got certain things that we have to do. So that's why we're running Policy Fest. So the next Policy Fest, in some ways, is like a technical Policy Fest. So it'll enable PDC to do the things it would normally do at spring conference.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we've got a huge pile up of voting papers. If they're all successful, we're just going to be sitting through voting paper after voting paper.
Yeah. Yeah. If you were going to give one suggestion to anybody about to embark on, suggesting a policy, what would your advice be? Like, don't do this, everyone does this and it's wrong, or this will shortcut something.
What you mean about an idea for a policy?
Yeah.
Well, I think the first thing to do is to try and work out which of all the policies you think it fits in, and of course Policy Development Committee are happy to advise on that.
Perfect.
And then I think the next thing to do would not be to expect to go to the group and get your policy implemented, because as I've tried to explain, all of the groups are at a different stage along their journey. And if you happen upon a group that's just starting, then great, throw your idea in. But if you're arriving in a group that's just about to put its voting paper to conference, the last thing it really wants is something coming in from left field, saying something completely different. That's not to say that you shouldn't say it, but don't expect it to be incorporated. It might be put on ice, and it might be introduced as an amendment at the next conference or something. Yeah. But it does get to the point where it gets really, really difficult to keep changing a voting paper. I mean, they aren't actually set in stone until after the amendment forum. I mean, I'm getting a bit technical again now, but much closer to the conference, they're actually set in stone. Yeah, it can be quite difficult, because one idea might feel like one idea, but in actual fact, it can have a knock onto everything else as well. Everybody seems to be either stroking a cat or have a picture of a cat. I haven't seen one across the keyboard.
I'm going to hand over to Mandy. She's got a question. Are you there, Mandy? Lovely.
Hi. Yes. Hi. Thank you, Anne. That was great. I just wondered if you could comment at all on the difference between, because obviously, as going to conference, we see these draft voting papers, and I've been involved in 1-2 groups very much on the periphery, for instance, the wildlife and habitats. And when I go to that, they've spent months and months, sometimes years, developing policy and voting papers, and lots of consultation and expertise and so on going into it. And that's great. And then it's, as you say, these big long voting papers come to conference. But on the other hand, we have policy that can get made by just an individual or a small group or a special interest group can put forward something just at the last minute. And I know there's a process of dates before conference with seemingly no expertise and I've seen things come to conference that then get voted on just by the people who happen to be at conference that time, which, as we know, is a minority of members and sometimes quite partisan on different issues, and can then get voted on by conference, who are the supreme body for policy, but that I've heard people say things have come to conference and passed that then don't agree with current policy. How can that happen? Well, obviously it does happen, but how can we prevent things like that from happening? What's your opinion as a, you know, one of the policy, very, very involved people in the party about that discrepancy?
Well, the first thing that happens is that it shouldn't be able to happen that something should come forward that doesn't agree with current policy. So it just means that the standing orders on the conduct of conference are not being adhered to. And I don't want to be too critical about that, because the PSS is absolutely massive, but that should get picked up. I mean, you shouldn't be able to make a new policy. Well, I mean, having said that, of course, I'm thinking of the HS2 one, where we had the pro-HS2 lobby and we had the anti-HS2 lobby, but I don't think that was actually in the PSS. But you shouldn't be able to make a policy statement that's in contravention with what's in the policy for a sustainable society. I mean, one of the biggest problems that we have is, as you say, only about, I don't know, 600 max people going to conference, which is roughly, it's just over 10% of the party. 10%, 60,000, yeah, 10%, which means that the other 90% are not engaged. I don't know how you get people to get involved in things. This is part of the reason that I'm here tonight, to try and expand on that involvement. If people who have partisan ideas are able to follow the processes and they are able to get their people into conference and vote, that is a fair process. And it's a bit like saying, I didn't want the Conservatives to win the election again. And you say, well, did you go out and vote? And people say no. And they say, well, you know, that is going to keep happening then.
Thank you, Anne. There's Mandy, have you got to come back on that, or are you done?
Just very briefly, yes. 600 out of, if it is 60,000, is 1%. Not 10%,
okay.
Which not to, you know, just correct you, but it does sort of show what a tiny minority it is. And I know there's been a lot of moves from people to try and say it shouldn't be happening like this. You know, there should be a way of electronic voting so that more people can participate, etc. But certainly something did happen. And I think it was around surrogacy that, you know, health spokespeople and that were saying, you know, shouldn't happen, but it did happen at conference. And I think there's a lot of problems there. I think what you know, what you're overseeing and what's going on in the policy working groups sounds really good process, and very involved and detailed and sort of expert, you know, but I think there is a big problem there in the role of conference. But I'll shut up now. Thank you, Anne.
Well, when I was on GPRC, I was I was pretty much the entire time I was on it, and even before it, involved in trying to get the governance changed, primarily to try and get the party made into a limited company. But we also looked at other things. And one of the things that we did look at was the role of conference in electronic voting and participation and that sort of thing. To get the kind of, well, first of all, I don't think we would ever be able to persuade all of those members to get involved anyway. But even to extend to things like electronic voting, it costs an absolute fortune. It's incredibly complicated. You have probably been to conferences where it's happened, and you know the first few votes always go wrong, and sometimes a lot of the voting goes wrong. And the other thing is, I mean, I don't know how many people are actually registered on the pre-agenda forum, but I'm going to hazard a guess that it's no more than about 45 people. So only a very, very small number of people know what the pre-agenda forum was. I mean, I didn't know what the pre-agenda forum was for years and years and years until I had to use it. I mean, it sounds obvious once you know what it is, that it is an agenda for pre-agenda documents, a forum for pre-agenda documents. But it just sounds old-fashioned and geeky, and you know, I keep inviting people to forums. I keep telling people to go on them to try and expand people's interest and knowledge about this. But it is very much a niche activity, making policy in the Green Party.
That's a shame. And hopefully events like this is the whole point of them. Okay, so I have 3 questions online. I also have Elizabeth with her hand. So what I'm going to do, Elizabeth, I'm going to do 1 question, then I'll let Elizabeth ask hers, and then I'll do the other 2, and then we've probably done on questions then. So, right. So the question is for Anne from Anonymous. The Green Party used to pride itself on policy based on data. Does Anne think that it's important, and if so, why? And does she think we can still truly say that is true? Let me just read that again for you. The Green Party used to pride itself on policy based on data. Does Anne think that is important? And if so, why? And does she think we can still say that is true? Is that clear, Anne?
Yeah. We are in the standing orders for the conduct conference. We are asked when we prepare a voting paper to prepare a background paper, and within that background paper, the arguments about why the policy has been presented in the way that it's been presented should be expanded upon. And within that, we would expect to see data being used to support that. And I think I would hazard a guess that we are probably the party that actually does that more than any other party. And I believe that there's some sort of transparency organisation that's actually asking our leadership to sign up to that at the moment. I think I know possibly where this is coming from, because I know there's been some issues around the manifesto, and some people feel that the policies that are going into the manifesto are not based on data. I think the policy is based on data. I think the decisions of what goes into the manifesto are really hard, given the political place that we're in after 14 years of Conservative austerity, and the fact that there isn't, we haven't got the latitude, arguably, that we had 5 years ago to be maybe as bold as we wanted to. But that actually isn't really my business. I'm happy for people to make representations to me, and I'm happy to take those, to feed those in if people want to do that. But ultimately, this is a question of balancing the comms against what's in our policy. And I'm as keen as anybody else not to see those policies watered down, and I'm fighting for that where I can.
So, essentially, so the post was asking, so when you mentioned the manifesto there, are you comfortable then that the things in the manifesto are backed up by data? Because you said that the policies are backed up by data, the selection of what goes into the manifesto, whether that's contentious or not. But if our policies are backed up by data, then the manifesto policies would surely be backed up by data. Do we have confidence in that? Because I'm in the middle of an election here, so.
Yeah. I mean, I think we will have confidence. The manifesto isn't actually drafted yet. I think I think they will be backed up by data, but they won't be backed up by all data. All policies in the PSS won't be in the manifesto.
Yeah.
But I know that some people are concerned about that. But I personally would just wait a bit, and I think that I think we haven't seen everything. We've only seen a snapshot, really, of what's going on at the moment. I'm probably saying more than I should, and maybe stepping outside my area of responsibility. But yes, I think our policies are really, really well backed up in data, and I think our background papers are excellent.
Lovely, thank you. I'm going to hand over to Elizabeth for her question. Then we'll come back with the final 2, Anne, and then we'll move on to Elizabeth's presentation. That's all right with you? Everybody okay with that? Thank you. Okay, so Elizabeth, you had a question?
Yeah, this is just a quick one, but it seems to me, especially having worked through the Truth About Zane campaign, that the Green Party is there's 2 sections to the Green Party. There's what happens at local party level, and then there's what happens in a kind of another bubble, which is conference and green spaces and so on, where far fewer people engage. And I'm just curious to know what you think, Anne, about how we might involve local parties at conference level, for example, through delegates, through policy being discussed in local parties, and that being something that local parties do, to try and bring those parts of the party together, if you see what I mean.
Well, in South Lincolnshire, we had our first 4 Green councillors elected at the last elections, and so we've been quite keen, and I think it's useful having people like me in our region to try to make sure that our councillors know what the critical policies are that relate. I mean, we've got a district council, so that relate to our district council. And also we have been putting various motions forward to the council that are reflective of our policy, of our PSS policy. So we're trying to tilt the direction of discussion within our local authority towards the Green Party agenda. It's quite a slow process, but we've had some success, and we've also found that quite a lot of the people of all colours, the Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems, they're all quite actually keen to do this at a local level. It's the national politics that tends to be a bit more confrontational. As far as getting local councillors to conference, I think that's a much harder thing to do because they always seem to be incredibly busy. But we mustn't forget as well that they do have the Association of Green Councillors who are always represented at council, and every councillor should be a member of the AGC. But yeah, I do agree with you, Liz. I know what you're saying. It's a communications issue, but it's a really huge one. The other thing that we have is the regional coordinators meet up from time to time to try and set up an exchange of best practice forum. So that's another way that we're trying to do it. But yeah, I agree with you. It's hard going, and we're definitely not doing it right yet.
Thanks so much, Anne, for patiently answering all these questions. Everybody's got so many. I've still got lots, but I'm just going to give you 2 for now, and then we're going to move on to Elizabeth's presentation. So first, a quick and easy one from CS Stannard. Is there still scope to join a policy working group? Thanks.
Yes.
Wonderful. That was nice and easy. Okay, let me see. How can this be addressed? That looks a bit lengthy. I'll try and get you an easy one. So some groups within the party have produced guidance documents that are then used to override policy. How can this be addressed? I'm not really understanding that. Do you understand the question?
Not really, no.
Some groups within the party have produced guidance documents that are then used to override policy. So how can this be addressed? I wonder if whoever anonymously posted that could maybe go a little further with that. So I'll go jump to the next question, and if you could just sort of reframe that, because I'm not even working out how really to translate that. So we'll go with this one, Anne, as the last question for now. Can we ask another anonymous one? Can we ask about policy that can be put forward as a late motion and then voted in after not being discussed with people? So late motions, that's a point actually, because I saw some of the on spaces. Late motions was always so hard to find, and I never really understood because we were grading them. Is it the number of likes? It all just seemed like very unscientific.
I might have to come back to the group on that to find out, because I'm going to, if I'm talking to you about it, I'm going to confuse it with emergency motions, I think. So can I come back to you with a written reply on that?
That's no problem at all, and then we can bring it up at the next meeting. That's lovely. Okay, so I think we're going to leave you in peace now while Elizabeth does her piece, and then we'll come back at the end, and if you're still with us and it's okay, then we'll catch up on any questions that I've not picked up on.
Yeah, I'm happy to hang around.
That's great, Anne. Thank you so much. So now we're going to go over to Elizabeth Mansfield, the second part of this evening's presentations. Elizabeth works on the Truth About Zane campaign, and I think you'd be hard-pressed as a Green Party member not to know about that campaign, because she's been so very stubborn, determined, and effective. And it's a campaign really close to my heart, because I met Zane's parents shortly after they'd lost Zane, and I was protesting fracking, and I met this amazing woman, his mum, and she was just trying to work out how the hell to be an activist to fight for justice. And I just find the whole story so upsetting and so unresolved still. But I'll hand over to Elizabeth for that now. And she's going to explain, you know, how she progressed that within the party. And I think it's just been inspirational. So over to you, Elizabeth. Thanks,
Tina. Thanks for that introduction. I thought I would start actually by telling you what happened and how I became involved with the campaign right from the start. I lived just a short distance along the River Thames from Kai and Nicole. And in February 2014, we had the worst flooding that had ever been known, worse even than the flooding in 1947. Cameron was Prime Minister at the time, and he put this down as the first catastrophic flooding caused by climate change. So February 2014, the river is flooded at Staines, where I live. It's flooded at Chertsey, just along the riverbank. And Kai and Nicole, who I don't know at this time, we've not met, are valiantly trying to defend their properties along with the rest of the community. And our local authorities, Spelthorne Borough Council, with Kwasi Kwarteng as our MP, Conservative area, are trying to fight with their hands on sandbags and so on. The local authority is very recalcitrant. On the night of February the 8th, Kai and Nicole and Zane come back from the pub where there's been a local community flood meeting. Their house is underwater in the basement, just in the basement. They're an all-electric green household, and they only have electric pumps functioning in their house. There are 6 pumps on 24/7 pumping out water from their flood basement. They've hired 2 days before a petrol pump from a local hire company because there have been some electric power cuts and they need a backup. They set this pump going and it's faulty. They get a fresh part for it. It's still faulty and leaking. So they turn it off and it's not working. This is important for the story. So on this night, Kai is in his office. They're upstairs. And he's working on a presentation that he's got to do. And Nicole puts Zane to sleep next door. And she's off up and down through the night, checking on the pumps and the flood levels and so on. She comes back at about 3 o'clock in the morning to check on Zane. And he's not breathing. He appears not to be breathing. She goes into a complete panic. She is doing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation because she knows how to do this. She's screaming for Kai and she's dialing for emergency services. Emergency services turn up on the scene very quickly. She and Zane are rushed off to St. Peter's Hospital. Kai is found in cardiac arrest next door and is rushed off to St. Peter's Hospital immediately after them. All 3 of them are in intensive care. Nicole is quickly stabilized and is then sitting next to her son, who dies at 4:39 in the morning. His body is wheeled in next to Zane, who is next to Kai, who is still unconscious. And Kai, as he comes round, has to be told by Nicole 4 times that his son is dead. You can imagine the trauma of this. Now, add into this the fact that Nicole is now put under police guard as a suspect in her son's death. She's dealt with very harshly by the police. She's marched away for questioning minutes after her son has died. Okay, so just kind of park that for a minute. Meanwhile, back on the ground where they're living, a decontamination centre has been set up at St. Peter's Hospital, and many neighbours and local people are sent there to be checked and so on and so forth. The fire brigade are called into the property. They take 3 sweeps of the property, and at each sweep, they find levels of hydrogen cyanide in the house. They also find a petrol pump which they log in the National Incidents Record Book as cold and unused. At the same or shortly after their investigation of the property, Porton Down, which is the Ministry of Defence headquarters, is called in. They also begin what turns out to be a 6-week investigation of the property and the surrounding area. And there's also a COBRA meeting, an emergency COBRA meeting following Zane's death. Okay, so it's the morning after Zane has died, and the police who've been in attendance at the COBRA meeting come out on Chertsey Bridge, and when asked by terribly anxious residents, is there going to be an investigation about the land? Is it contaminated land next to Kai and Nicole's house? What's happening? And they are told there is no investigation into land at this time. The opinion is that Zane was killed from carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty petrol pump. That police story has remained from that day to this. I'll just jump back to Kai and Nicole. When Kai comes round, he's paralysed, and now to this day he is in a wheelchair, and his consultant has diagnosed him with paralysis due to hydrogen cyanide poisoning. So 2 years later, Kai and Nicole face Zane's inquest. They have now been denied legal aid 3 times, and they are up against, within that inquest, top barristers representing Spelthorne Borough Council, representing the Environment Agency, representing the pump hire company of the petrol pump, and the owner of the contaminated land. During that 2 years between Zane's death and the inquest, the start of the inquest, a group of us, myself included, become very, very close to Kai and Nicole. We form ourselves into the campaign committee. We have a representative from the Fire Brigades Union. We have a representative from Unison. We have myself as a representative from the North Surrey Green Party. We have Rebecca, who is a representative from the local Labour Party. We have a representative from a local campaign against the Cuts Party, and we have a representative from the Socialist Party. And we are all working hard together. We later have someone from the National Education Union and other people, Communication Workers Union, join the campaign committee. So we're fighting about getting legal aid. We're also fighting to get documentation to bring forward at the inquest. Now, this fight to get documentation reveals something extremely shocking. And I need to tell you this because it's the basis of the Zane's Law campaign, which has now very recently taken off inside the Green Party. In 4 years before Zane died, the Environment Agency wanted to build a little facility, let's call it that, which was right next to Kai and Nicole's home. And before they did that, according to environmental law at that time, a desktop studies research had to be made on the land where it was going to be built. That desktop study was made, and the environmental engineer who made that study said in his report that the land was contaminated, it contained hazardous gases, and that it was a risk to life and potentially could cause death. That was the findings of his preliminary report. The contamination officer, the chief pollution officer at Spelthorne Borough Council, who worked on that report, did not follow up on the recommendations of that report that there should now be full testing of that land. Instead, that pollution officer suggested that the Environment Agency build a gas-proof membrane into their property to protect them from the contaminated land. And apart from that, all was silence. We discovered this documentation during the 2 years between Zane's death and the start of the inquest. Kai and Nicole, when they bought their house, had done a full environmental search on their property, and there was no record coming up on the search of there being contaminated land. So before this inquest starts, we discover that not only did this incident happen with the Environment Agency, but that on this land next to Kai and Nicole's home, immediately after the war and up until the 60s, the Ministry of Defence were using it as a munitions testing site. Following that, there was 60,000 tons of non-described environmental waste tipped into this area. In adjacent landfills owned by the same people and with the same dumping licenses given to them, there had been a hydrogen cyanide contamination incident and various other incidents. So this was known to be contaminated land by the local authority. Our surmise is that from the moment of the tragedy, everything pointed to them trying to cover this up so that there was no liability. Okay, so we don't know this yet. But this finding led us to the call for an independent panel inquiry after the inquest judgment. Okay, so there are 6 pre-inquest hearings during those 2 years, and during which time, this is what links the Truth About Zane campaign in with the Hillsborough Law campaign, actually, which is to do with coronal law. A coroner has a huge amount of power. A coroner in this country currently, and Andy Burnham's public accountability law is attempting to address that, and I'll say a little bit about that in a minute. But currently, the coroner can determine what kind of inquest he or she presides over. Either they decide that it's that it has a dimension to it which is in the public interest, or not. So the coroner in Zane's case decided that this had nothing to do with the public interest. Therefore, he disputed an Article 2 inquest. He threw that out. And he said that he, therefore, would be the judge and the juror, and he would determine what evidence was heard at the inquest. Surprise, surprise, none of this evidence that I'm telling you about, which exists and which has been obtained through Freedom of Information requests, which is known and documented now in the national press. We've had Ministry of Defence whistleblowers coming out to confirm it. There's no doubt about it. None of this was heard at the inquest, allowing the coroner to stick to the line from that very first Cobra meeting that Zane died because of a faulty petrol pump in use at the time of carbon monoxide poisoning. Sitting in that inquest room is Kai in a wheelchair, paralyzed with a diagnosis of hydrogen cyanide poisoning and paralysis caused by that. He was a couple of meters away from Zane at the point of the tragedy, and yet his medical records were not admitted into the inquest to be heard as not relevant. Okay, so what we think we have here is a cover-up. So following the following the inquest judgment, we form a campaign committee, and we are calling now for an independent panel inquiry into Zane. At the same time as this is happening, of course, Hillsborough is hotting up. They've had similar problems with, 24 years before they got justice. Andy Burnham, who's been a staunch supporter of the Truth About Zane right from the very beginning, he comes on board with the campaign. He ties up what's happened in the inquest with Zane to what's happened in Hillsborough Law. When Bishop James Jones is invited by Theresa May to lead an inquiry in relation to the Hillsborough Law, Bishop James Jones has long interviews with Kai and Nicole, and is totally on board with their story and is an ally to our campaign, although he is, bless him, keeping his powder dry until we get our independent panel inquiry, which we hope, if we have a Labour government at the next election, we will get. Keir Starmer has also been a staunch supporter of this campaign and has given his own personal commitment that he will be putting his signature to an independent panel inquiry. Well, we hope he will. There are other good people in the Labour Party, Richard Bergen, Steve Reeves, many others actually, who have come forward and spoken for the Truth About Zane campaign. An early day motion was set up calling for it. I'm just trying to get in my notes here exactly when that was. In June 2019, an early day motion was tabled, which Caroline Lucas also put her name to, of course. And so that's all sitting there. So that part of the campaign is sitting there. So here's another part of the campaign, which is where the Green Party really gets involved, which is around the question of contaminated land. Actually, I will just finish because I haven't quite said everything about the independent panel inquiry. I got Natalie Bennett when she was leader down to meet Kai and Nicole. Natalie came on board. She also publicly called for an independent panel inquiry. I managed to get a resolution passed through conference as an emergency motion in October 2018. A motion was passed by the Green Party conference unanimously, apart from one person who had an issue about dredging, which was mentioned in the resolution. But that was passed to back an independent panel inquiry for Zane. Jonathan Bartley, as soon as he became leader, I invited him down to meet Kai and Nicole, which he did. And so he also was calling for an independent panel inquiry. So that call has been going on actively through the Green Party. So now we come to, let me just get it. We come to the handing in of our petition. So we've now got 117,000 people signed up to the Truth About Zane petition for an independent panel inquiry. And we've tried to hand that in spring 2020 to Downing Street, but haven't been able to because of COVID. We're not actually able to hand it in until what would have been Zane's 16th birthday on October the 21st, 2022. And we have a massive event planned. The fire brigade are bringing their campaigning engine, which we get permission to park in College Green, opposite the Houses of Parliament. So we've got Jeremy Corbyn on the engine. We've got Natalie Bennett on the engine. We've got Matt Rack, General Secretary of the TUC. We've got a video call from Andy Burnham. We've got Zane, bless him's head teacher from his school. We've got Kai, and we've got the wonderful Nicole, who Tina has already referenced. A little bit more about her later. So knowing that this is coming up, I tried to we didn't know the date, so it had to be put to the Green Party conference as an emergency motion. Because what I wanted to do was I wanted the Green Party to pass a motion of support at its conference that could be read out at that meeting from the top of the engine as we hired it in. I felt it was really important for that to happen. But unfortunately, my motion didn't get enough likes on the green spaces. So I'll come to that in a little bit. So that motion did not get heard. Now at COP 26, which takes place in November 2021, Jeremy Corbyn, as part of one of the Peace and Justice projects, invites Natalie, Kai and Nicole to an event at which they launch Zane's Law. Now, the idea behind Zane's Law is, we've investigated the 1990 Environment Act, which was good to begin with. It came out of Europe, and it was about trying to get contaminated land in this country up to speed. Successive Tory governments took the teeth out of it. So stuff is still on the statute book, but the guidance, coming back to the difference between what's in law and what's guidance, the guidance basically said that local authorities had to fund it themselves, that they could have regard to their constituents and their financial situations about whether they did anything about contaminated land. And so, of course, councils didn't do it because they haven't got any money, they haven't got any resources, they're frightened of something getting in the way of planning, blah, blah, blah. You can imagine the scenario. So what Zane's Law sets out to do is to bring together the things that are currently in the Environment Act, together with some things that aren't yet in the Environment Act, together with robust guidance, and together with statutory legislation which says that this is government responsibility based on polluter pays principle, that this finding and registering of contaminated land and sorting it out is an urgent priority in this country, especially with climate change and flooding. We are sitting on a ticking time bomb. So that was launched, and I brought another resolution, a Zane's Law resolution, to the autumn conference in October 2023. Again, that actually was chosen as a priority motion by Carla Denyer and Adrian Ramsey, but still it didn't get heard at conference. So still not policy, still not Green Party policy to have that as part of the Green Party's remit. However, people did kind of prick up their ears, and I was very welcomely received on the Green Party Campaigns Committee, where I lobbied to very receptive ears that we should have a national Green Party-led campaign about Zane's Law, which could be put out through the local parties. So we slogged from January up until February the 19th to get various things in place. An independent Zane's Law website, which is now up and running. I set up a petition specifically for Zane's Law through 38 Degrees, which is up and running. And we developed a Green Party Zane's Law resources pack, which has things in it, like, so you get it in your local party. So what can you do? Well, you can have a stall on the high street. You can show this poster. You can print out this leaflet. All these resources are available for Green Party members. You can talk to people. You can find out if there's anyone in your area concerned about contaminated land. You can follow it up. You can link with local campaigners on contaminated land and flooding, because they are related. You can use this model motion supplied in the pack to take to your council, if you've got green councillors, to put before your local authority to see if they will sign up to a motion that's in support of getting Zane's Law on the statute book. So because I'm in Lewis District Green Party, or I should have said that at the beginning, I'm in Lewis District Green Party. I was in cahoots with my colleague Imogen Makepeace, who very sadly has been put on a no-fault suspension and subsequently resigned from the Green Party. However, Imogen got that resolution onto the agenda for a Lewis District Council full council meeting, supported, of course, by all the other Green councillors, Zoe Nicholson, and also importantly, Emily O'Brien, who is our Green Party spokesperson on rural affairs. And it was passed unanimously on February the 19th, the first local authority in the land to do so. Only days later, on February the 23rd, Brighton and Hove passed it unanimously. And then Adur Council, these are all close to Lewis, also passed the motion. And coming up on the 25th this week, Strood is also going to put forward the motion. Well, we'll hope they'll pass it. And interestingly, there, in the journey of getting these motions up for local authorities to pass, pollution control officers are coming in and offering their advice in relation to the motion. So the Strood ones were very interesting because they said the other thing that needs to be in this motion is there are no resources in terms of personnel who are trained to carry out this, because there's been no resources put into that. So this is now a rolling stone movement. Having got the Lewes District Council one through, we were then able to go to Julian Dean, who's the chair of the Green Councillors. So they've got their kind of little space on Action Network, and Julian is able, through Action Network, to get our resources pack out to all the local Green parties so that they can, if they want to, pick up an action on this campaign. So I think that pretty much brings me up to date. So in terms of Green Party processes, getting a motion to conference is very difficult, I have found, because it's completely angled, unless you've gone through another route, as Anne was talking about, through a policy development committee, which I didn't kind of know about that at the time. I know a lot more now. Then even if your motion is brilliant, it's all down to how many likes you can get on Green Spaces. And of course, there aren't that many people on Green Spaces.
I was going to say, I wonder what the percentage is of members on Green Spaces, because much like there's only 1% of the membership ever at a conference. So when policy is decided, less than 1% of people who can get to conference are voting on that. But then who's on Spaces pressing the like button?
Well, it was interesting to me that when I tried to get my emergency support resolution through for that petition hand in at number 10, I put mine up, and then another motion came up, which was to support Drag Queen Storytime, I think it was, and that got like 150 likes, and I was struggling to get over 50, and I was kind of dumbfounded by that, because I thought my resolution, I'm sure lots of people wanted to support Drag Queen Storytime as well, but the point was that my motion was about a specific action that was coming up. This was the moment to do it. There wasn't, it wasn't kind of general support. It was for a specific action.
Is it worth asking Anne at this point in the conversation, if you're there, Anne, is what should we have done differently, or what should Elizabeth have done differently? Because this was a timely and time-sensitive policy. That is there a way of jumping past things? Because I remember Drag Queen Storytime came in as an emergency motion, was it, or a late motion? And I don't understand what would have worked, just purely because the Green Party, if the Labour Party is seizing on this, it would have been nice if we'd have been involved a lot more and supportive of getting this through. And I just don't understand how that happens. Sorry if that was jumbled.
No, I think that's what an emergency motion is for, but I'm just opening the standing orders on the conduct of conference. So shall I come back to you on that in a minute?
Yes, I'll let Elizabeth. I'm so sorry I interrupted you, Elizabeth. We'll let you.
No. I think I've probably, come to the end of what I have to say. Yeah, just so that, yeah, so getting motions was difficult. And then I think for anyone who's wanting to get involved in, or kind of pushing a campaign forward in the party, the place to start is your local party. That's what I did each time. And obviously at the beginning of this, because North Surrey Green Party, which I was the chair of at the time, was right in the area where the Truth About Zane campaign was, then that was a no-brainer. But building up from party level, I think is the way to go. And then knowing that the campaigns committee is there, and going to them for advice, kind of going up to that kind of, what I call it, the other half of the Green Party, which is outside of the local parties. You've got to find your way into that. And I think what's difficult about that is that most of that kind of is available on Green Spaces, and not everybody is tech aware. I think that's a real problem in the Green Party, is that tech awareness and confidence with how to use the technology is a barrier for people, and so that's a problem, I think.
And feel free to come in now.
Emergency motions have to be posted an hour before they're heard. And in fact, again, it's quite difficult because unless you know about this, I have seen emergency motions posted, and there is literally a pin board that you write your motion on in handwriting normally, unless you've, it has to be something that's happened after all the deadlines have passed. And it has to be, as I say, it has to be posted an hour before it's discussed. And you have to get 50 people to sign it to say that it's an emergency motion. So I think it's worth. I think if you've got, I just think really the best thing to do is to contact Policy Development Committee if anybody gets into this situation, and we will find in the standing orders on the conduct conference, we will advise you. We're at conference, so we can advise you at any point really.
So Anne, could you just clarify something for me then? So you could have all these policies lined up to come to conference, and some are late motions and they've got through, still not quite sure on why they do. Anyway, they get through, but you could still be kind of gazumped and leapfrogged by someone attending conference who has people, up to 50 people available to sign a piece of paper by virtue of them being there.
Yeah,
so
you have to.
It just sounds undemocratic.
Well, there has to be a vote to suspend standing orders, and that has to be a 2/3 majority. And it's urgent business that prior written notice has been given 1 hour before it's debated. There are no amendments permitted. And the emergency motion shall only be accepted provided the issue has arisen or substantially changed since the deadline for late motions. Explicit commentary must be provided. It has to be consistent with the PSS, signed by 50 people, less than 250 words, costing the party no more than £100, and doesn't significantly alter the party's agreed political strategy. So I'd have thought something like Zane's motion would have met those requirements.
And a question just come in that kind of echoes, I think, a bit what I was, but much more concisely. Can an emergency motion only be requested if you're actually at conference? Because thinking about this, there's so many single mums and working people and people who are disabled and people who just will never be able to attend conference. So it feels like it's so incredibly limiting and unrepresentative. So is it true then? So an emergency motion can only be requested if you are physically at conference?
Well, unless you get somebody else to do it for you. I mean, I know, as I mentioned earlier, because I used to work with the conferences committee team quite a bit, that they really want to do hybrid conferences, but there isn't an organisation that actually has the software that we would need to run our voting system remotely and simultaneously at conference, because it's just the way that we run our voting system. It's quite
but this already happens in other parties, surely, and in other like businesses and things that where they have a big shareholders meeting across the world and everyone has to vote. And I mean, they must exist, the system. Is it just that we can't afford it, or?
I think there are. I mean, we tried a hybrid conference one year, didn't we? And it was fairly chaotic.
Well, yeah, but it was the first. Yeah.
I mean, we are moving towards that, but we haven't got it at the moment. That's the simple, sort of fact of the matter. And it's not for the want of wanting to do it. It's for the want of having the resources to get to that position.
Mandy's got a quick question. You want to come in, Mandy?
Hi, yes. Yeah, just on this issue, I have suggested to conference committee and the conference organizer, and it's never really been explained to me why this wouldn't work. I know, because I've attended conference in person and online at different times, and I think the hybrid works quite well, except that there's often problems with the people at home being ignored by the chairs and so on. Or not being given long enough to vote and so on. But, if that was ironed out, there are people who register as not attending in person, but then are allowed, if they want to actually attend in person, if they suddenly find they can, they're then obviously not given a voting card and have to sit in the conference venue voting on their device. So it's certainly possible for people to vote on their own device without it costing the party any money of setting up a system. So why can't that be done for everyone? Regardless of whether you attend in person or don't, everybody votes on their device. And that would be, it would save all this, you know, the thing where you've got factions in the conference hall, intimidating other people, turning around and glaring if you vote in the wrong way, which does happen. And I think it would be a lot fairer system. I also think that, yeah, sorry, I'll leave it there.
You were there the year I was there with my granddaughter, Mandy. And it was the first time she'd ever attended a political conference, and she was only 18. And she was sitting there and she felt so empowered doing votes. And then she voted on something. Actually, she voted differently from me. And then she got all embarrassed and uncomfortable because someone turned around and glared at her. And it just is awful. I mean, particularly for people who are maybe shy or young. And I do understand that. And it can be really intimidating. But that privacy of voting on your device, I didn't realize that. Of course you can. Because if I'm at conference and I've only just been able to come at the last minute, but I registered online to vote, I can vote there. So if we were all doing online, why would we not? Anne, can you solve anything for us?
I think, I mean, to be honest, I'd forgotten that we do have. Are you sure that people vote that are offline? I mean, I thought that they could participate in.
Yeah, we definitely vote.
Can they? Okay. Yeah,
I've done the conference. I mean, I nearly always go, but I missed a couple and I voted online. Admittedly, every once in a while it was glitchy, and as Mandy said, sometimes the main problem was just not being heard when you were saying, actually, this is glitchy, or I'm sorry, can you clarify this point? But no, the voting was there, Anne.
Well, I think that just goes to show that you're asking the wrong person the question.
We can't all know everything, Anne. You are fairly omnipotent so far, so you're doing brilliantly. But I think we all need to know. So in rooms like this, we all discover things that perhaps we didn't realize. And that's what we lack, is that shared knowledge. I feel like things happen in silos in this party. And you've got a conference committee that does conference stuff, and you've got policies that do theirs, and everybody, but seeing that overall picture, that's why I sit as an observer on SOC and GPEX and GPRC, because to me, at least if I'm observing everything I can, I feel like I can see the picture. It's not always a pretty one, but at least I can see it.
Can I make a plea for everybody to look out at the main governance bodies and attend their meetings as observers? Yeah. Because it's really important, because we are the people that hold those bodies to account, including you holding PDC to account.
Yeah. I've also seen the difference it makes, Sam, because having attended so many of these meetings, sometimes it was only ever me at SOC or something. And I think they kind of get complacent with you. And then all of a sudden someone else is there and I can see everybody's behavior perks up. And sometimes people, and I'm not saying SOC in particular, but of those bodies, sometimes you get complacent with each other in a body. And it's good to know you're being watched. You are still serving the membership. It's not just serving the group. Linda, you've come in with a question, love, so put on your microphone if you want.
Yes, it's a question for Elizabeth. We live just round the corner from where the Skripal poisonings happened, and they also happened in other parts of Salisbury, had been contaminated, and those places were either all the turf was taken off where it was grass. The house that the Skripals lived in was virtually demolished. The roof was taken off. What I don't understand, I mean, and that was Porton Down. What I don't understand is, as Porton Down was involved, I don't understand the difference. Why hasn't that ground where Zane died, why hasn't that ground and those houses been evacuated and the same thing done?
Well, that's a very good question, Linda, and I wish I knew the answer to it. Porton Down were at the house for 6 weeks. The difference, of course, between the Salisbury poisonings and Zane's death is that well, as I understand it, the hydrogen cyanide that obviously exists in that landfill site was activated it was carried by floodwater, because the way the water worked, the river didn't overflow the river did overflow its banks, but that wasn't the water that was coming into Kai and Nicole's basement. It was water that was coming through a lake behind the house and then coming underneath the house. So it was carrying the toxins that way. So, I mean, it wasn't so immediate. It wasn't like it was out there in the environment for everybody. And as I say, I mean, my firm belief is that it's a massive cover-up, and that's why. The person from Porton Down did actually call Kai, and on the telephone said to him that they had found hydrogen cyanide, and that could now activate the Kai and Nicole's insurance company to start work on the property and putting a gas-proof membrane in it and so on. Kai and Nicole still live at the house now with a gas-proof membrane in, with very conflicted feelings, because of course it's full of their memories of 7 glorious years of their beautiful boy, and also the trauma of his death. They can't sell the house because no one wants to buy it. They're trapped.
In relation, Elizabeth, to other contaminated sites, because I do remember at the time, because when I met Zane's family, it must have been, I think I met Nicole in 2015, or it might have been late 2014, can't remember. Anyway, so we were talking about contaminated land, and we were talking about also, like, because I was working on fracking, we were talking about contaminated land and abandoned sites, sites that were then also orphaned, that no one knew actually that they existed, and no one claimed responsibility for them, and sometimes they weren't even on maps. So I would assume that in order to get more buy-in to the campaign, is people feeling that it's not just this one place near a river that got flooded, that these sites of contamination are throughout the United Kingdom. Is there any way of knowing anything about the number of contaminated sites? Sorry if I've taken a bit off message, but
no, it's very interesting, and I've got a lovely answer for you, because in Strood, where the next one's coming up, and our green councillors who are moving it down there got in touch with obviously their local officers. They get this: there are 1,700 contaminated landfill sites in Strood that they know about.
In Strood alone?
In Strood, yeah, in Strood alone. And the resources that they've got to deal with this problem work out at £1.30 per site. So the pollution control officers there were mad keen for this resolution, and mad keen to keep red underlining there are no resources to deal with this. Now, the other interesting thing that's happening about this is that since I set up the petition, and Kai and I are kind of working on this now, it's a bit like the Mr. Bates story. People have been sitting out there in the world with worries about land. People have had nasty smells, people with children not feeling very well, all sorts of stuff has been happening. And people have had little fights in their area and nothing gets done about it. But actually, it's now getting tied up, or it has the potential, the massive potential, to get tied up with the call for Zane's Law. So it's
that awareness that people, like, again, I can cite back to Australia for this. When we were doing the anti-fracking campaign, we were talking to the Knitting Islands in Australia. They were saying that the places where people were saying, actually, my kids are getting sick, they're getting skin rashes, headaches, people have been unwell. And because it was little here and there's, they got away with that for a long time. And it wasn't really until these people found each other online that they realized the size of the problem. And I think that's what's really needed. But again, we asked here, could we have the number of air monitors and can you tell us what sort of air monitoring you do around fracking sites? And we found out that because the air monitoring just in general showed bad quality air, they'd actually halved the number of air monitoring systems in the country. So, if you're not measuring it, then there's no problem. quite crazy. And
Thank you.
I don't know how you sound so dignified about this, because I've gone straight into full-on rage internally, but you handle this so well, and so does, Kai and Nicole. It's been a heck of a slog. It's over 10 years now. They're slogging away just trying to get some justice. It's tragic, truly tragic.
Yeah, there's tears in my heart about this, I can tell you. Yeah.
Right. Okay, because I find that so sad, because I saw Kai at the last Green Party conference, and there's such charming, warm people. Yeah, Hazel, so sorry, love. I saw you had your hand up. Please jump in.
Yeah, okay. I guess this is for Anne, really. Going back to policy and how motions actually get on the final agenda. I ought to know the answer to this question, but when we get to the point where we rank the motions with our likes or however it's done, does every single member get an email saying this is what's happening and with a direct link to the page they can go to rank the motions, or do you have to be floating around on green spaces and be magically aware it's happening? I ought to know, but I can't remember.
I echo that question.
Do you know the answer, Tina? I think that Louisa sends out an email to every single member. That is my recollection, but
Okay.
it's not my job to do that, and I wasn't even in post last time we did it either. So no, I'm sorry, I don't know for sure.
Well, if an email goes out to everyone, it's better than I thought it was. I am one of the geeks who follows things, so I just couldn't remember if everyone.
Well, it'd be worth getting Louisa to come and talk to you, and also Standing Orders Committee, to get the ball.
I'm just trying to think about how to get it. So we know that the number of people who use green spaces is relatively small, and they tend to be, quite keen on policy and stuff. And we all know that in any organisation, only 10% of people will ever get properly involved. And we were talking earlier about how to get local parties and ordinary members more involved in the policy process. And I'm just wondering if there's any way of making it easier for people just to sort of come in for 5 minutes and, express an opinion rather than having to completely follow things for weeks on end at times, it feels like.
Well, I'll just tell you that there are 84 people on the pre-agenda site, which shows you the interest that there is in the agenda at the moment out of 50 or 60,000. But also to say I'm very happy to come and talk to any of your local parties if that's of any help or interest. Don't overwhelm me, but I'm happy to do, one a fortnight or something if that's what's required.
That's amazing. That's a really generous offer, which you'll probably come to regret, but it is a great offer. And I also loved your suggestion earlier as well that it's particularly this group, Green Party Women, because we're trying to enable our membership to get more engaged so that we get up past that, like just 84 people saying what happens in this party, that we have someone come from conferences and different groups and SOC, because all these questions, and poor you being the victim of them all, of how do we get this done, and this seems wrong and that doesn't seem diplomatic. So it'll help us to get a bigger picture as well if we start working out who do we question about what. Why
don't you all join the pre-agenda forum? I will put it in.
Give it to Sue to put in the chat.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah, marvelous. Okay, so questions. If anybody's got any questions for either Elizabeth or Anne, or just in general, you want to ask a question and hope somebody in the room's got the answer, then please do feel free to raise your hand. Elizabeth?
Yep, I've got a question for everyone. Actually, it's a request rather than a question. In the chat, you'll find the link to the Zane's Law petition. I would love everybody here to sign that petition and share it. You'll also find the link to the Zane's Law website, where you can also find a link to the Green Party resources pack. I would love you to share that too. And I would love you, when you go on to Green Spaces and the pre-conference agenda, I would love you to please like the Zane's Law motion that is currently there. And again, with that, if you can spread it among your friends, I would be so grateful. One thing I forgot to say.
One thing, Elizabeth, just before you move on, in the chat right now is the Green Party Autumn Conference Agenda Forum. Is that where we'll find that we're going into like?
Yes, Yes,
Okay.
it's in the Green Party pre-conference agenda forum.
Pre-conference agenda. Okay.
Which is quite tricky to negotiate because everything goes in there chronologically. So the more people put in, the more you have to scroll about. But I think you'll find Zane's Law posted fairly near to the beginning. One last thing I wanted to say, because I can see that John Hopes is on this call, and John is heading up the newly created, hooray, pollution policy working group. And Zane's Law and landfill, etc., is going to be part of that. Sadly, so far, I have not been able to turn up to either of the meetings, but I will be there. And so Zane's Law is now going to get discussed in that way as well. So it's a bit weird. It's all kind of, we've got a campaign for it, active and out there, but we still haven't got it in our policy. So it's a bit, backwards and forwards. But
Wonderful. Right.
Elizabeth, have you had a policy statement made? I mean, if you have a leader who's interested, or if you, it's a bit difficult because you're with the general election coming up. But if you could persuade, or if there was an event that was happening that would make this topical, you could try and make a policy statement. Unfortunately, it's unlikely to make it through to the end of the process unless you can link it to something topical. But that would be another way of quickly getting this into policy.
would it? Oh, can you hear me? Would it not be topical because we've just had 3 Green councils passing it at their local authorities? Would that?
Why don't you get in touch with me?
Okay, okay, Anne, I will.
I love that idea. I think you should. And I think, Elizabeth, I've seen you work so hard on this campaign, and I've met you in many a field, championing this. And I think if you can get any help at all from Anne to progress this, because this is just such a Green Party policy. It's so relatable. It's relatable because it's deeply human and concerning. And it's relatable because it's environmental. And it's how that's knitting that story together is just so important, I think. So, yeah, I'd love to see this happen. Right. Okay. So we've only got about 5 minutes left. And I really wanted to take at least a moment to ask everyone to do a virtual or a volume on applause for Anne and Elizabeth for such an incredibly informative evening. So thank you very much. That was just wonderful. Really was. It was so good of you to share your time, and for your offers for help in the future, Anne. Which, yes. I also noticed that the wonderful Sue Williams has put in the chat the addresses for SOC, GPRC, and GPEC, so Standing Orders Committee, Green Party Executive, and Green Party Regional Council. And you can email, and I do this regularly, you can email all those people, and you say in your email, I would like to be an observer at the upcoming meetings. Can you give me the dates and access? And generally, they're kind enough to email you the day or two beforehand with the link, or some like SOC already have the link that's always the same one, so you just jump in each time. And you would only probably ever need to mail once if you get them on your side to mailing you, or with a separate Zoom link. And really observing those meetings not only informs you, but it really does keep us honest, People need to be seen. So is there anybody else with anything else to add?
Well, I could say that our meetings are on the 3rd Tuesday of the month, and they're always advertised on the PDC Green Space. And
we can register to observe?
You can observe, yes, you can register to observe.
You must be the only ones I have never come and peeked at. Yeah.
Well, yeah, come along then.
Yeah, I will do. Okay, expect another email. Okay, then. All right, and then that's it then. So thank you, everybody, for showing up. Thank you to Green Party Women Committee for pulling all this together and doing all the clever stuff. And to, of course, again, Elizabeth and Anne for their time this evening. Thank you and good night.
Well, thank you. Bye.